The conference room fell silent as Maya Chen walked in, her portfolio clutched against her chest like armor. 23 years old, fresh out of Stanford's computer science program, and already making waves in Silicon Valley's most exclusive circles. But as she took her seat at the polished mahogany table, the whispers began. They thought she couldn't hear them. The snickers about diversity hires, the jokes about her accent that barely existed, the way they pronounced her name wrong despite having worked with her for 6 months. Maya's smile never wavered. It had become her signature. That unwavering, professional smile that said she belonged here, even when everything around her suggested otherwise. What none of them knew was that David Reeves was watching from the back of the room. The company's largest silent investor, worth over $200 million, had been observing more than just quarterly reports. He'd been watching how his money was being managed, how his investments were treating their people, and what he saw made his blood boil. Maya had joined Nexus Technologies as their lead AI researcher, bringing with her groundbreaking work on machine learning algorithms that could revolutionize data processing. Her innovations had already saved the company millions and positioned them ahead of their competitors. Yet here she was, enduring another meeting where her ideas were dismissed, her contributions minimized, and her very presence treated as an inconvenience. The presentation began. Maya stood at the front of the room, her voice steady and confident as she outlined her latest breakthrough, an algorithm that could process complex data sets 300% faster than existing technology. The mathematical elegance of her work was undeniable. The practical applications were staggering. Any reasonable person could see they were witnessing the future of artificial intelligence. But reason had left the building long ago. James Morrison, the VP of Development, interrupted her mid-sentence. His tone dripped with condescension as he questioned her methodology, despite having no background in AI research himself. Sarah Hutchins from marketing rolled her eyes when Maya attempted to explain the commercial potential of her work. Tom Bradley, the CFO, openly checked his phone while Maya detailed the cost savings her algorithm would generate. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she clicked to the next slide, but her voice remained steady. She had prepared for this. She had prepared for all of it. The dismissive looks, the subtle undermining, the way they would later take credit for her ideas in meetings she wasn't invited to attend. What she hadn't prepared for was the moment when Morrison stood up and announced that while Maya's work was interesting, they would be moving forward with a less sophisticated solution developed by the team. A solution that was objectively inferior in every measurable way. A solution that would cost the company millions in missed opportunities. The room erupted in agreement. Heads nodded. Papers shuffled. The decision was final. Maya gathered her materials with practiced grace, her smile never faltering. She thanked them for their time, just as she always did. She walked out of that conference room with her head held high, just as she always did. But something inside her had changed. The weight of constantly proving herself worthy of a seat at a table where her contributions were already reshaping the industry had finally become too much to bear. David Reeves watched her leave, then quietly exited through a side door. He had seen enough. While Maya sat in her small office, staring at algorithms that could change the world, David was making phone calls. As the company's largest investor, holding a 40% stake in Nexus Technologies, he had certain rights. Rights that the management team had forgotten about in their arrogance, rights that were about to reshape their entire world. The legal paperwork was already in motion before Maya finished updating her resume that evening. 3 days later, Maya arrived at work to find the parking lot buzzing with activity. News vans lined the street. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone in a Nexus Technologies badge. The company's stock price was plummeting in real time, displayed on every financial news channel across the country. David Reeves had called an emergency board meeting. Using a combination of his controlling interest and allies he had quietly cultivated over months of watching the company's toxic culture, he had executed a complete management overhaul. Morrison, Hutchins, Bradley, and 6 other executives found themselves clearing out their offices by lunchtime. But the real shock came when David announced Maya's promotion to Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately. The technology community erupted. Maya's story, which David made sure reached every major outlet, became a rallying cry for countless professionals who had faced similar discrimination. Her groundbreaking AI research, now properly attributed and funded, began attracting attention from major corporations worldwide. Within 6 months, Nexus Technologies had transformed from a struggling mid-tier company into an industry leader. Maya's algorithms were licensing for millions of dollars to Fortune 500 companies. The stock price had tripled. Revenue was up 400%. The same executives who had dismissed her work were now watching from the outside as their former company dominated headlines for all the right reasons. Maya found herself fielding offers from Google, Apple, and Microsoft. International conferences competed to have her as their keynote speaker. Universities invited her to lecture. Her face appeared on magazine covers with titles like The AI Visionary Reshaping Silicon Valley and From Overlooked to Unstoppable. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during her first company-wide meeting as CTO. Standing at the same podium where she had been dismissed months earlier, Maya looked out at a sea of faces. New faces, diverse faces. Faces that reflected the world their technology was meant to serve. She didn't need to smile to mask discomfort anymore. Her smile was genuine now, radiant with the knowledge that merit had finally triumphed over prejudice. David Reeves watched from his usual spot in the back of the room, no longer silent, no longer simply observing. His investment had paid dividends far beyond financial returns. He had helped create an environment where brilliance could flourish regardless of who possessed it. The presentation Maya gave that day outlined the company's new direction. Her algorithms would be used to develop assistive technologies for disabled users. Machine learning applications would help diagnose diseases in underserved communities. The processing power she had unlocked would accelerate climate change research and renewable energy development. Technology, she explained, was only as powerful as the diverse minds that shaped it. Innovation required perspectives from every corner of human experience. The future belonged to companies brave enough to embrace that truth. As Maya spoke, her former colleagues watched the live stream from their new, significantly less prestigious positions. Morrison had taken a junior role at a startup that folded within 3 months. Hutchins found herself struggling to explain the gap in her resume during interviews. Bradley discovered that his reputation for poor judgment had followed him throughout the industry. They had learned, too late, that talent doesn't conform to their narrow expectations, that brilliance comes in all forms, speaks with all accents, and presents itself in ways that challenge comfortable assumptions. The ripple effects of Maya's story extended far beyond Nexus Technologies. Other companies began examining their own cultures, their own blind spots, their own potential Maya Chens sitting in small offices with world-changing ideas. Venture capitalists started asking harder questions about diversity and inclusion before writing checks. Business schools added case studies about the correlation between inclusive leadership and innovation. Maya's algorithm became the foundation for breakthroughs in autonomous vehicles, medical diagnostics, and space exploration. Her work contributed to solutions for problems she could never have imagined while sitting in that conference room, enduring those dismissive stares. But the real transformation was in Maya herself. The young woman who once armored herself with a defensive smile had evolved into a leader who spoke with quiet authority about the responsibility that comes with technological power. She established mentorship programs for underrepresented students in STEM fields. She created scholarship funds for first-generation college students pursuing computer science degrees. In interviews, reporters often asked Maya about that pivotal moment when everything changed. They wanted to know about the anger, the vindication, the satisfaction of proving her doubters wrong. Maya's response surprised them. She spoke instead about the colleagues who had supported her quietly, offering encouragement in empty hallways and defending her ideas in meetings she never heard about. She talked about the importance of creating systems where talent could be recognized before it reached a breaking point. She emphasized that her story wasn't just about one person's triumph. It was about the countless others still fighting for their voices to be heard. David Reeves, when pressed for interviews, remained characteristically reserved. He had never sought attention for his actions. To him, the decision to restructure Nexus Technologies wasn't about heroism. It was about basic business sense. When you have a generational talent on your team, you build around them. When you witness systematic discrimination, you eliminate it. When you have the power to create change, you use it. The partnership between Maya and David became a model for ethical investing. David's subsequent ventures were evaluated not just on their financial potential, but on their commitment to fostering inclusive innovation. Maya's rise to prominence opened doors for other overlooked talents, creating a network of leaders who prioritized substance over superficial judgments. Years later, as Maya stood before Congress testifying about AI ethics and regulation, she reflected on that conference room where her journey began. The trembling hands, the forced smile, the weight of constantly proving her worth, all of it had led to this moment where her voice carried the authority to shape policy that would affect millions of lives. The technology she had developed was now protecting privacy rights, preventing algorithmic bias, and ensuring that artificial intelligence served humanity's highest aspirations. The woman who had once absorbed insults with grace was now setting standards that would prevent others from enduring the same treatment. In the audience, David Reeves sat quietly, no longer needing to observe from the shadows. His investment in justice had yielded returns that couldn't be measured in dollars or percentages. He had helped unleash human potential that was transforming the world. As Maya concluded her testimony, her words carried the weight of every professional who had ever been underestimated, every innovator who had been overlooked, every person who had smiled through discrimination while their ideas could have changed everything. The young woman who had walked into that conference room with trembling hands had become a force of nature. Her algorithm had evolved from a dismissed presentation into the backbone of technologies that were saving lives, protecting freedoms, and pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that talent will always find a way to shine, even in the darkest rooms. That justice, while sometimes delayed, has a way of manifesting through unexpected allies. That the greatest innovations often come from those who have been forced to see the world differently. Maya's smile was no longer a shield against hostility. It had become a beacon of possibility, lighting the way for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong in rooms where their ideas could change the world. The conference room where it all began still exists in the Nexus Technologies building, but now it bears a plaque with Maya's name, commemorating not just her breakthrough algorithm, but the day a company learned that true innovation requires the courage to recognize brilliance wherever it appears. The story continues to ripple outward, inspiring new generations of leaders who understand that diversity isn't just a moral imperative, it's the key to unlocking humanity's full potential. In boardrooms and laboratories, classrooms and startups, Maya's legacy lives on in every person who chooses to champion talent over prejudice, substance over superficial judgments. She took their insults with a smile, transforming pain into purpose. He took their company without warning, proving that power used wisely can reshape entire industries. Together, they demonstrated that justice may sometimes move slowly, but when it arrives, it can change everything. The future belongs to those brave enough to build it together. 2 years after Maya's congressional testimony, the world witnessed the full scope of what her algorithms had made possible. The assistive technology branch of Nexus Technologies had developed neural interfaces that allowed paralyzed patients to control computers with their thoughts. The medical diagnostic division had created AI systems that could detect early-stage cancers with 99.7% accuracy, saving thousands of lives in underserved communities where specialist doctors were scarce. But it was the climate research applications that truly showcased the transformative power of Maya's work. Her processing algorithms had accelerated environmental modeling by decades, helping scientists predict and prevent ecological disasters with unprecedented precision. Coastal cities were implementing flood prevention systems based on her predictive models. Agricultural communities were optimizing crop yields while reducing water consumption by following AI-generated recommendations powered by her technology. The conference room where Maya had first been dismissed now hosted a different kind of meeting. Young entrepreneurs from around the world gathered monthly for what had become known as the Maya Chen Innovation Sessions. These weren't typical pitch meetings filled with polished presentations and practice elevator speeches. Instead, they were raw, honest conversations about ideas that seemed impossible, solutions that challenged conventional thinking, and innovations that came from lived experiences of struggle and resilience. David Reeves had institutionalized these sessions, understanding that the next Maya Chen might be sitting in that same room, harboring world-changing ideas while facing the same systemic barriers. The sessions were deliberately diverse, not just in demographics, but in perspectives, backgrounds, and approaches to problem-solving. A refugee engineer might present alongside an indigenous environmental scientist, while a formerly incarcerated programmer shared the stage with a teenager who had taught herself coding in foster care. Maya attended every session, but not as the centerpiece. She had learned that true leadership meant creating space for others to shine. She asked probing questions, offered technical guidance, and shared resources, but most importantly, she listened. She had become the ally she wished she'd had during those early, lonely months at Nexus Technologies. During one particularly memorable session, a young man named Carlos Rodriguez presented an idea that reminded everyone why these gatherings mattered. Carlos had grown up in East Los Angeles, watching his grandmother struggle with diabetes management while working multiple jobs. His AI-provided glucose monitoring system could predict blood sugar fluctuations hours before they occurred, potentially preventing diabetic emergencies in communities where emergency medical care was limited. The technology was elegant in its simplicity, revolutionary in its potential impact. But Carlos had been turned away from traditional venture capital firms dozens of times. His prototype was built from salvaged computer parts. His presentation slides were created on a borrowed laptop. None of that mattered in Maya's conference room. Within 3 months, Carlos's system was in beta testing at community health centers across California. Within a year, it had expanded to serve underserved populations in 12 states. The algorithm Maya had developed to process complex data sets had become the foundation for a solution that was literally keeping people alive. Stories like Carlos's multiplied across the technology landscape. The culture Maya and David had fostered at Nexus Technologies spread throughout Silicon Valley like beneficial code, replicating itself in startups and established corporations alike. Other investors began adopting David's model of patient observation and strategic intervention. Other companies started measuring success not just in quarterly profits, but in the diverse perspectives driving their innovation. The transformation wasn't without resistance. Some industry veterans complained about political correctness disrupting traditional business practices. Certain media outlets criticized what they called forced diversity in tech leadership. Online forums buzzed with debates about merit versus representation, completely missing the point that Maya and her allies had proven. Diverse perspectives didn't compromise merit, they revealed it. Maya addressed these criticisms head-on during a keynote speech at the Global Technology Summit. Standing before an audience of 10,000 industry leaders, she presented data that was impossible to dispute. Companies that had embraced inclusive innovation were outperforming their traditional competitors by every meaningful metric. Patent applications from diverse teams were being approved at higher rates, customer satisfaction scores were climbing, employee retention was improving, market valuations were soaring. But beyond the numbers, Maya shared something more personal. She spoke about the emails she received daily from young women, immigrants, and underrepresented minorities who saw her story as proof that their dreams were achievable. She read messages from parents whose children were now pursuing STEM careers they had never imagined possible. She shared updates from the scholarship recipients who were developing technologies that addressed problems their privileged classmates had never considered. The ripple effects had become waves, and the waves had become a fundamental shift in how the technology industry understood innovation itself. David Reeves, now in his 70s, had begun planning his legacy beyond Nexus Technologies. The David Reeves Foundation for Ethical Innovation was establishing technology incubators in underserved communities worldwide. These weren't charity projects. They were strategic investments in human potential that traditional venture capital had overlooked. The foundation's first international incubator in Lagos, Nigeria, had already produced 3 startups that were revolutionizing mobile banking, educational technology, and agricultural management across the African continent. Maya had evolved too, beyond her role as CTO. She now served on corporate boards, advised government agencies on AI policy, and taught graduate courses at 3 universities. But she never forgot the young woman who had walked into that conference room with trembling hands and a forced smile. That memory grounded her, reminded her of the responsibility that came with her platform. In quiet moments, Maya still returned to that original algorithm, the one that started everything. She would study its elegant simplicity, its mathematical beauty, and marvel at how something so seemingly abstract had become the foundation for technologies that were saving lives, protecting environments, and opening doors for countless others who had been waiting for their chance to contribute. The story that began with insults absorbed behind a smile had become a movement that was reshaping entire industries. The action that started as one investor's moral outrage had evolved into a systematic transformation of how power and opportunity were distributed in the technology sector. Years later, historians would mark Maya's breakthrough not just as a technological achievement, but as a turning point in the democratization of innovation. They would note how one conference room, one algorithm, and one act of strategic justice had proven that the future truly belonged to those brave enough to build it together. The final chapter of this story was still being written in classrooms around the world, where children learned about algorithms not as abstract mathematical concepts, but as tools for solving real human problems. In these lessons, Maya's story wasn't presented as an exception. It was taught as an example of what becomes possible when society chooses to listen to all its voices. A 10-year-old girl in rural Kenya, inspired by Maya's journey, was already teaching herself programming to develop water purification monitoring systems for her village. A teenager in inner-city Detroit had started an AI club at his high school, using Maya's open-source algorithms to create predictive models for community violence prevention. These weren't just isolated success stories. They were part of a global generation that understood technology as a force for justice rather than just profit. Maya often received videos from these young innovators, their faces bright with possibility as they demonstrated their creations. Each message reminded her that the smile she had once used as armor had transformed into something far more powerful, a beacon that helped others find their own courage to innovate, to persist, and to demand the respect their ideas deserved. The conference room where it all began had been renovated one final time. The mahogany table remained, but the walls now displayed a rotating gallery of innovations from the Chen Innovation Sessions. Patent certificates hung beside handwritten thank you notes from communities transformed by the technologies developed within those walls. Children's drawings of robots helping their grandparents shared space with scientific publications that cited Maya's foundational algorithms. At the center of it all, a simple plaque bore Maya's favorite quote from the sessions: "Every algorithm begins with someone believing a better world is possible." Below it, in smaller text, were David's words from the company's mission statement: "Capital invested in justice always pays the highest dividends." The story that began with a young woman's determination to smile through prejudice had become proof that individual courage, supported by principled allies, could reshape entire industries and inspire generations. Maya Chen's algorithm had processed more than data. It had processed the very future of innovation itself, proving that brilliance truly did belong everywhere, and everywhere it appeared, it deserved to be celebrated.